Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to my heart, and that is soybean herbicide technology. Before we dive into that topic though, look at how close we are to harvest season. That corn is starting to lose its color a little bit and wrap up the end of its life cycle. It will not be too long before we're breaking these two combines out of hibernation and starting to do our preparation for this fall. I think it would be a perfect time to maybe do a fall harvest tillage machinery tour. I know you guys have been asking one for a long time. We do have a few pieces of equipment. I mean, we don't have a lot, but I'm sure I could find something to show you, give you a tour around what we use every day in the fall to get this crop out of the ground and get the ground conditioned for next year. So I'll barter with you here. If we can get 300 likes on this video and get the channel to 5,000 subscribers, we're only 100 subscribers away from 5,000, I will put together a fall machinery tour for you guys. I know you like to see all this big, beautiful John Deere green and yellow, shined up and hooked up to equipment, ready to do its work. So let's hit 300 likes, 5,000 subscribers, and I'll give you a tour of all this nice John Deere equipment. They've just been resting here so peacefully since last spring. Okay though, enough of that. Let's get back to the topic at hand, soybean technology. This will serve as my late season update on Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans, also just referred to as Xtend, versus Enlist, also referred to as E3 soybeans. We have both on our farm. They're very similar herbicide technologies, both Group 4s, however they're very different at the same time. I gave a very rudimentary explanation of both soybean technologies last May when I was planting our couple hundred acres of E3 soybeans that we're trying out this year on our farm. I'll put a link around here somewhere of that video, that way you can go back there and refresh your memory or watch it if you haven't. I would like to provide you an objective, anecdotal, and data-based evaluation of both these platforms and how they perform on our farm. I have zero skin in the game in this battle. I am only looking for what is best for our farming operations in terms of long-term sustainability and profitability. At the end of the day, we want to do our jobs better and more effective. That way it can benefit the end consumer. These two herbicide technologies are similar but different routes to get to that same end result. The Xtend technology is owned by Bayer, formerly Monsanto, and the Enlist technology is owned by Corteva, formerly Dow and DuPont. Both find their foundation in Roundup resistant technology. They are equally resistant to Roundup or glyphosate, a Group 9 herbicide. Roundup entered commercial agriculture around the turn of the century. For over 10 years, it was the silver bullet. It was the one-trick pony that kept fields clean all across the Midwest. There has never been a herbicide in its heyday that worked as well as Roundup did. It was phenomenal. The cleanest our fields have ever been was when Roundup packed the punch that it did, before weeds grew a resistance to it because it was so effective at increasing the natural selection pressure. Since then, farmers have been searching for the silver bullet that could mimic the efficacy of Roundup. It could smoke every single weed in a field and not even harm your crop at all. The Roundup technology offered broad spectrum control of every single weed in the field. Over time, these weeds began to develop resistance to Roundup itself, and it completely lost its effectiveness on a few key weeds in our fields. On our farm and a lot of farms in central Illinois, the big weed is Waterhemp. In our region, Waterhemp is the reason that these herbicide platforms are so important. We cannot manage our weeds with Roundup and other herbicides alone. We need the punch of an auxin-based herbicide to give us the edge in weed control. In other regions and crops, they face different weed types than just Waterhemp. However, for us, Waterhemp is the final boss. It is insane. Let's talk about it a little bit more. This plant right here is Waterhemp, public enemy number 1 on our farm. It's a member of the amaranth family, or as you may know them, the pigweeds. It is an extremely invasive, annual, small-seeded broadleaf. It is continuously emerging in different flushes throughout the growing season, making weed control exceptionally challenging. Not only is the soil seed bank packed full of Waterhemp seeds, there are numerous populations across the Midwest and in different regions in the country with confirmed resistances to different modes of actions of herbicide. That's the scariest part. You're probably wondering, why is it such a resilient, vigorous, and adaptable weed in so many different fields and crop types? Why has it overtaken so much of the landscape and caused such issues with weed management? The answer to that question is threefold. First and foremost, Waterhemp is dioecious, meaning that there are male and female plants all across the field. Because Waterhemp is dioecious, it can cross-pollinate all the way across the field, resulting in a massive amount of genetic diversity from plant to plant. If you think cross-pollination with other water hemp is bad enough, it can also hybridize with other pigweed species to create just an endless amount of possibilities in terms of offspring. This is very similar to the type of selection pressure that we have applied over the decades to numerous insects out in our field, and that's why we currently have to plant refuge seed corn with our GMO seed corn to make sure that there's not always resistant populations. It is much more difficult to apply that kind of technology to weed control. The second aspect that makes water hemp so challenging to manage, in combination with the genetic diversity of the offspring, one water hemp plant can produce up to 1 million seeds. That is a lot of weeds in the seed bank to have to control year after year after year. When you start to calculate the seed potential out in a field that is infested with water hemp, it becomes very depressing very quickly. If one plant can produce 1 million seeds, it does not take very many years of that to continue for your entire field to be full of water hemp. The third and final aspect of water hemp that makes it so competitive is that it utilizes the C4 photosynthetic pathway. Now that is a discussion for a completely different day, but it is very similar to corn in how efficient it is with converting sunlight to growth. Soybeans are only a C3 plant, meaning that they're just not quite as good as growing as water hemp is and our corn. In the heat of the growing season, water hemp can grow up to 1 inch per day. There's no way that these soybeans out here, which are only going to grow 3 to 4 foot tall, can compete with them, when a water hemp in the correct environment and with the right competitiveness can grow up to 12 feet tall. Bar none, water hemp is the hardest adversary we face out here in our soybean fields and even in our corn fields year after year. It is a miraculous crop. Well, I guess it's not a crop, but if it was a crop, we'd be really good at growing it. It is so challenging to overcome the level of productivity and competitiveness that water hemp has. We're gonna walk out and take a look at some of our Xtend soybeans real quick. That way you can kind of see what the plants are looking like. Here is a field of Asgrow 36X6 Xtend soybeans. Xtend meaning that they are resistant to all dicamba herbicide technologies. Now, they are only labeled for 3 herbicides: XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Fexapan. The genetics of Xtend soybeans are proven. Year after year, these have been racehorse genetics, as I've said, with some of the highest yield potentials of any soybeans we have ever grown on this farm. As I said a couple weeks ago, these 36X6s have had triple-digit yields in plots before. They are capable of incredible things. The Xtend soybean platform has been in commercial production for 5+ years. Like I said, it's proven itself in the last few. Where Xtend runs into problems is the dicamba chemistry. The dicamba chemistry is notoriously problematic in terms of its drift and volatility out in the fields. As it entered large-scale production, there were countless reports of off-target damage to sensitive soybeans and other crops. That is the major problem with Xtend soybeans and why so many people are considering the switch to Enlist. There are some major known complexities with dicamba. Dicamba's chemical name, 3,6-diachloro-2-methoxybenzoic acid, wow, has been around for a long time. It's been used in corn production for many years. When it's used correctly, it is one of the best broadleaf burn down herbicides out there. One other perk of the dicamba chemistry is it is shown to have up to 14 days of soil residual activity as long as there's not a rainfall event after it's applied. That is 14 days that you're almost guaranteed that you will not have another flush of water hemp come out immediately after. That's one thing that the Enlist herbicide technology does lack, is that it is only a contact killer. If you spray Enlist on your fields, anything that emerges after that application is not going to be affected by it. Although the off-target damage to other crops is usually minor, and in some cases some people have anecdotally claimed that it can cause a yield bump in soybeans if they're slightly tinged by dicamba, it is an issue that has become widespread. Even our field of Enlist soybeans, which was a half-mile away from the nearest field of dicamba, even showed signs of cupping. Cupping of new leaves is the main symptom that's going to present itself if your soybeans have been exposed to dicamba and they're not resistant. It is very safe to say that even when the dicamba chemistry is followed exactly to the book and the operator does a good job applying it, it still has issues hurting other people's fields. There is nothing you can do to control this chemistry from its high volatility. The correct temperatures and this stuff vaporizes into the air and is going with the wind stream. Due to all of the known problems with the dicamba chemistry, the label restrictions on it have gotten tougher year after year after year. It's very difficult to get this applied in a timely and effective manner on your farm at the right time period. In the Xtend platform, dicamba is your trump card. It's your herbicide that you can apply out there and almost guarantee that you're going to take down the water hemp. The label varies a little bit in every state, but the two major things in Illinois that limit our ability to apply this on a broad scale is, one, It cannot be applied if the temperature is above 85 degrees that day or if it's forecasted to be above 85 the next day. And you got to think, we're wanting to apply this in early June. It's not hard for you to get days where you're not going to be able to apply at all. You can't apply if the wind speed is too low or too high, which isn't always an issue. However, it does not take much for you to hit the top end of that wind speed, which I believe is 10 miles an hour. Don't quote me on that one. And two, you cannot apply after June 20th in Illinois. As I said, you're flirting with that window where you want to be putting on that herbicide. That's exactly when your soybeans are probably getting close to canopying and you're putting that last shot in between the rows to make sure that you clear out those broadleaves, and the rest can be controlled with the canopy of your soybeans. I'm not going to sit out here and argue either way whether or not those restrictions are beneficial or negative to the use of Xtend and limiting its problems in other people's fields. However, they are a major limitation in terms of applying it in an effective time range on your farm. Those restrictions limit our flexibility so far that it makes it almost not worthwhile to use dicamba in our fields. And you may argue, what's the point of even planting Xtend soybeans if you can't apply what they're traded for, the Xtend herbicide platform? That's a good question, and that's where that yield comes into play. This season on our farm, we sent the applicators out of the gate the first week of June, way before the restriction date even started, because we wanted to have everything sprayed. Our weed control because of that is a little bit lackluster, as we used that dicamba a lot earlier than we would have liked to. If we could have pushed it back a couple of weeks, we would have been able to get a lot more out of that pass. Later in the season, we're starting to see a lot of breakthroughs, even though we had a residual in with the dicamba when we sprayed it. We just had to use it too early. I'm very glad that we ended up doing so, because that unforeseen banning of dicamba really threw a wrench at the plans of the applicators this year. Now, that did end up being resolved, and we probably still could have gotten applied before the cancellation date. However, that was a major problem and will continue to be a concern for people planting Xtend beans, is that they won't even be able to use the technology to control their weeds. Not only that, the label has not even been renewed for next year, so there's no guarantee that if you plant Xtend beans, you will be able to use Xtend herbicide. All those factors considered though, Bayer does claim that Xtend soybeans have a 95% satisfaction rating from their customers. You take that information however you want. We are very happy with the performance of Xtend beans on our farm, and they've done very well for us. However, I do want to see Enlist soybeans in their potential for weed control and yield. The 36X6s are looking really good. Here is one Asgrow 36X6 soybean I just pulled from out in the field. These were planted 165,000 plants per acre. Realistically, we probably got a final stand of 155 to 160. With that population and this pod count, these plants should do extremely well. These beans have been very tried and true for us. This is just one plant, and the diversity across the field obviously can be very large, so they may not all look this good, and some may look better. Here is a field of Don Mario 3756E Enlist soybeans. Again, I talked in our video about these soybeans and why we were planting them on our farm. Of all the trials last year, these soybeans showed the most promise on the Enlist platform. Again, Don Mario is a South American genetics company sold and serviced by Seed. These Enlist soybeans are resistant to 2,4-D choline, a group 4 herbicide. They are only labeled to be sprayed with Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo. Enlist 1 being just the 2,4-D choline product, and Enlist Duo being a mix of 2,4-D choline and Roundup. One added benefit of this program is it's also resistant to glufosinate, a group 10 herbicide commonly referred to as Liberty, a glutamine synthesis inhibitor. The addition of another mode of action is very useful for managing resistant broadleaf weeds. The Enlist herbicide platform shows great promise as a competitor to the Xtend platform without the issues that the dicamba chemistry has. The 2,4-D chemistry that is based on is significantly less volatile than the dicamba chemistry. It will not have near the application issues that dicamba and Xtend do. It still has to be applied with caution, but there's much more room for error. Although 2,4-D choline and Xtend are very similar in how they control weeds, 2,4-D choline as a chemical is much less problematic than dicamba is. It has a significantly less chance of off-target crop damage than its competitor. One additional thing to keep in mind about the Enlist herbicide system is that it was not subject to the same label issues that dicamba had earlier on in the season that caused a lot of farmers and applicators massive headaches. These people will probably sleep a lot better at night knowing that the product they need to control their weeds is not going to be pulled from them in the middle of spraying season. That being said, The Enlist herbicide has not been proven in the fields like the Xtend herbicide has been. 2,4-D-choline is a newer variation of the 2,4-D molecule. Xtend beans base their resistance to generic dicamba. Any dicamba can technically be applied to an Xtend field, though it is only labeled for the newer versions of the dicamba chemistry that are supposedly less volatile. Dicamba has been around for an extremely long time, and it has always been a great product. The one big question with the Enlist soybeans is, can they compete in the yield department with the Xtend soybeans? The rumor around the block is that the Enlist soybeans will not be able to hold in the top end yield department with the Xtend soybeans. Last year was not a great test of this because we didn't get to see those 80, 90, 100 bushel beans, whereas this year I think conditions are ideal for massive bean crops. It is because they are so unproven that we're planting them on our farm in a trial type basis. We want to see how these beans can produce for us versus the competition. It is one thing to see a company's plot data and make your decision based on that. It's another to put the beans on your farm and see how they perform. The Xtend and the Enlist platform have actually been around for the same amount of time, but the Xtend was pushed into production, commercial production, much faster and has much more data replications, and many more acres of Xtend have been planted. It is the #1 planted soybean in America right now. That top spot in the soybean market share contest may be challenged next year, with Enlist soybeans rapidly gaining in popularity due to all those issues with dicamba's label. What that means is we're going to have a lot more on-farm data across the Midwest to see what these soybeans are capable of and to let them prove themselves a little bit more. We're going to see what that yield data shows on our farm and across the region before we make any decisions on what technology we're going to move forward next year. These soybeans do look very good right now in this field, but they were planted about 3 weeks after the next closest soybean field due to rainfall and the tractor breakdown. When we harvest this field, we are going to view the yield data very objectively and try to make the best decision for next year. Here's a closer view of the Don Mario 3759E soybean variety. Planted at 165,000, much like the 36X6s. This one seems to be a little bit larger of a plant. To be fair, I pulled one random plant out of the field. This does look better than that Asgrow soybean, but it could have just been in a better location or had less plants around it and it ended up growing a little bit bigger. Don't let pictures like this tell the difference in the soybean. I just wanted to show you what it looked like. This soybean does look phenomenal, but let's let the combine show the difference. That's the only true test. She is a big one though. I was significantly more satisfied with our weed control in the Enlist field, but that was due to one reason. We were able to push our application back on these soybeans a little bit closer to canopy than we were on our Xtend soybeans. Due to the complexity of the label, we knew that we needed to get that Xtend on, because if we missed the window to do it, we wouldn't be able to put anything else on that would kill our Waterhemp. We got away with pushing back our post-application pass closer to canopy on these because we knew it wasn't going to have the restrictions that dicamba was. It was a much safer bet for us to rely on the Enlist herbicide in that regard in this field. It is very important to note that our satisfaction with the weed control of these Enlist soybeans does somewhat have to do with the fact that they were planted 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later may not sound like much, but that is 21 days where you are not controlling the weeds versus 21 additional days in our Xtend soybeans that we do have to control weeds. I do believe that the earlier your soybeans are planted, the higher their yield potential is, but the harder it is to continuously control weeds. I think that's a very important note on this conversation. These were planted later, they had a better emergence, and they grew more efficiently versus the ones that were planted in the cooler weather. They just had a better environment for weed control and less time to control the weeds. The ultimate question is, what is the future of soybean herbicide technology in production agriculture? Both Roundup Ready 2 Xtend and Enlist are viable technologies and awesome tools to have in the tool belt of a farmer. Having two big dogs in the agriculture industry, Corteva and Bayer, competing to produce the newest and the best soybean technology is great for farmers and is great for consumers. That will be one of the catalysts that leads to continued advancement within that specific area of our industry. This competition has already resulted in Bayer having a new product about to exit the pipeline. Bayer is currently waiting on the green light to bring their newest technology to the market, Xtend Flex soybeans. Xtend Flex soybeans are the same soybeans as Roundup Ready 2 Xtend with an added resistance to glufosinate, adding the ability to apply Liberty to these dicamba soybeans, much like you can apply Liberty to Enlist soybeans, will add more flexibility for dicamba producers to keep producing that specific variety of soybean. This is something that will help farmers, especially with label restrictions and concerns that are involved with dicamba. The Liberty herbicide, although a little bit iffier in effectiveness than the 2,4-D dicamba herbicides, does still play a very good role in controlling weeds. That would definitely decrease your risk of being caught with your pants down and not being able to apply dicamba and not having anything that'll kill the water hemp. The Liberty, if done right, is effective in controlling water hemp to an extent. But at the end of the day, genetics and yield are king in the decision of what soybean varieties people are going to plant on their farm. If nothing can come close to competing with Xtend soybeans, I would imagine that farmers will keep planting them. Enlist soybeans do show a lot of promise, but we're waiting on all that data to come in so we know for a fact that they are the real deal. People will still continue to plant the highest yielding varieties unless the difference in yield is negligible enough that they want the access to the other herbicide technology. A perfect example of this was at the end of the Roundup Ready era. As the Roundup soybeans were on their way out and the Xtend soybeans were on their way in, the transition years were filled with farmers who were still planting very, very competitive Roundup-only varieties. The Roundup was not even effective at controlling the water hemp at that time, whereas the Xtend technology would kill the water hemp, but they still opted to choose those high-yielding Roundup varieties. We did that on our farm. We sacrificed some weed control, but those varieties we planted were phenomenal. After a few years of refining the Xtend soybean genetic lineup, those Roundup Ready beans can't even come close to competing with the Xtend beans. I'm hoping we will see the same type of competitive nature in the current lineups. If there is one thing I want you to take home from this video, it's that there is not one specific solution to controlling resistant and resilient weed populations. We have to do our job as farmers and stewards of the land to manage this stuff properly and to make sure these technologies last as long as possible. Resistance is inevitable, but we can do different management things to make sure that it takes a long time for it to get there. Using only one product on our fields like we did in the Roundup Ready days was not the solution, and we probably shortened the commercial efficacy of Roundup significantly by doing so. We did not know any better at the time, and the people who were selling it to us only agreed with that philosophy. Farmers must be responsible with their weed management. Xtend and Enlist are fantastic and promising products, but without a well thought out and well managed herbicide plan, resistance is inevitable. Farmers and applicators should always be using multiple modes of actions and layered residuals in their weed management system to make sure that these weeds cannot overtake and reproduce in our field and consistently spread new seeds to our seed bank. The less weeds that live out in the field and make it to seed, the easier our job is and continues to stay as the years go on. A proper corn weed control program is also pivotal to keeping your soybeans clean on those off-rotation years. A lot of water hemp does make it to seed in cornfields that are not properly cared for in terms of weed management. There are also other non-chemical approaches to managing weeds that we may have to consider in the future. One of those being higher populations of the target crop to help shade out that ground so weeds cannot grow in those fields. Other potential options may be using cover crops to help shade out that ground from the start. I'm hoping to try out a few strips of rye in some of our soybean fields and see how that helps with our weed control. With all of that information I just conveyed to you, I want you to remember that I have no skin in the game other than the long-term success, sustainability, and profitability of my family's farm. I personally don't care what product wins at the end of the day. I just want something that we can use on our farm that yields well and is effective at its job. Oftentimes, most seed dealerships and companies sell both products as their license from Bayer and Corteva themselves. We're going to wait and see what the yield data shows on our farm and across the community. We're going to aggregate that data and make some comparisons and hard decisions about what platform is best for our farm for the future. I hope maybe this video gives you some more information for making that decision on your farm, or if you're not a farmer, it helps you understand the differences and the specifics of these technologies in their application to farms. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you found that useful and informative. Drop a comment below if you have any questions. I love to talk about farming and this kind of stuff. Now remember, 300 likes, 5,000 subscribers, and I'll give you guys a fall equipment tour. As always, I really appreciate you guys' support. Thanks again for watching. Have a great evening. Peace!